Hello, ladies and gents. Time for a very, very quick Q&A, just to update people, reconnect. Let's see what's going on, and see what's happening out there in the world. And if you've got any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. Make them one sentence long and have them end in a question mark. It's always a good idea when asking a question. I'll be on for 15 minutes and then I will have to leave. One of the things that I wanted to start out by saying is just to reiterate like certain key points that I keep going over. I find myself going over and over again. With people who've come to the Spark Life Coach project and the various projects that I'm working on at different parts in the timeline, different parts in the story. So to sort of sum it up and put it together, what has happened is over time, I've been looking at why people struggle to move forward in their lives and why, despite psychology and counseling and psychotherapy and talking, basically a lot of talking, they still can't seem to move forward, and why people, like myself, I was a client for psychotherapists and counselors with my own issues, why we don't move forward, and then why we tend to end up in relationships that are not necessarily ideal for us, where perhaps we can end up being used or deprioritized or whatever it is, and then try and sort of come to a fix for that. So historically, everything has a historical weight. You have this conclusion, you get this idea, you talk to that person, that seems great. And, it's YouTube. It's not the academic world. Obviously, there's no peer review. Nobody's holding you to any standards. If you're entertaining, people will watch you. And if you're boring and you suck, it doesn't matter how right you are, people won't watch you, So, but it does have that. It does have a similarity with academia in that, like, you build empirically and you can get lost along the way. Just because you're using reason and logic and building things empirically doesn't mean that you don't get lost. And I like to regularly check that, I'm not getting lost and we're not getting lost. So the story sort of went from, why do people get into abusive relationships? Oh, because there's this thing called narcissistic personality disorder. There's the cluster B spectrum from the DSM that includes histrionic, borderline, and I forgot it myself then, antisocial personality disorder, more typically called psychopathy. So you have this explanation for why abusive relationships occur, because there's these people out there who cause them to occur. What is the long-term effect of that? Why is that damaging? Why do people, get into this repetition compulsion and go through the same relationships again and again? And you start to look at like issues of codependency and issues related to like people pleaser syndrome. And then you study, if you wish to, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and you can find things that add meaning to what your experience is, because it's such a confusing experience. It's such an isolating experience. Anything that helps you to crystallize and clarify what the hell is going on, you're going to use. And there is a risk, of course, that when you come across something and it lends meaning to chaos, it brings order to chaos, that you can cling to it, or you can start to mold everything through that prism of seeing things. And it's good to check. It's good to take a step back and go, okay, is this really what's going on? Or is this now a story that I'm just telling myself? And is this story that I'm telling myself moving me forward, or is it now holding me back? So as far as the CPTSD thing goes, that's why I created Fortress Mental Health Protection System. The YouTube channel was so that I could, in a very clear, very step-by-step way, help people get from emotional dysregulation and presumed emotional flashbacks to a state where they would be more emotionally literate, and then the system doesn't need to rely on maladaptive, crappy stress coping strategies like emotional flashbacks, like emotional illiteracy, because you have to be emotionally numb to survive painful emergency scenarios. It's not useful to be emotionally tuned in the middle of a catastrophe. It's useful to switch it off. And with the idea that, presumably over time, we can all move on. And then I noticed that frequently that wasn't happening. And I was like, there might be a part of this story that isn't right. or there might be multiple parts of this story that aren't right, or that don't really fit, or that aren't appropriate, or they might be 100% correct, factually correct, but 0% useful. Do we all understand that that's possible? Like, you can be dealing purely in the world of reason and facts purely. There's no lies. It's all pure truth. Well, there's never pure truth, but let's say it was just pure truth, pure facts, and still don't go anywhere useful. You still end up like nowhere good. So factual is great. Scientific is great. Is it the ultimate? No. You actually want to be able to get on with your life. You actually want to be able to meet your objectives. There needs to be a utilitarian element to this. So this is a good time to sort of take a little refresher. You know, are we really talking about CPTSD? Are we really talking about codependency? Are we really even talking about narcissistic abuse? There's an awful lot of people using the term narcissistic abuse and narcissism, which is pretty clear they don't really understand what it means. Or they think it means my ex was nasty. Not everybody, but many. And they're using it wrong. They're using the terms wrong. And then they're using CPTSD incorrectly. Why? Well, because these things are hard to understand. You know, how many of you, in all honesty, without any prompting, could name the 10 diagnostic criteria, the 10 traits that would be used to diagnose a person clinically for narcissism? How many of you could do that right now? Just write it down straight away. If you're being honest with yourselves, probably not many of you could get past 3. So if you don't know the 10 diagnostic traits just off the top of your head, how reliable do you think your diagnosis is? I'm not saying that people aren't the victims of emotional abuse and that they've not been manipulated narcissistically, but that doesn't mean you were with somebody who had full-blown NPD. And you might say, well, why split hairs? Well, because you want the truth, or you're just going to say the truth doesn't matter. But if the truth doesn't matter, then stop saying NPD. So you have this sort of a double bind scenario. We don't need to use the academic language then. We could make a word up. We could say sneaky demon face, and it would be just as useful. And then we can stop confusing it. So this is where I'm up to. I'm sort of reviewing everything and going, okay, am I doing my job? And many people say, oh, yes, absolutely doing your job. And I'm going, But if I'm furthering a false narrative, I wouldn't really be doing my job. If I'm not helping you to move forward, I'm not really doing my job. And for many people, they're not really victims of narcissistic abuse, nor do they have CPTSD. So to funnel them through that is probably going to miss the point. There might be other points. We might actually only ever really be on this channel talking about 2 things, childhood trauma and heartache. We might not ever be talking about anything else. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps. It's a dialogue. It's not like I'm not just telling you where it is. I'm wondering if that's the case. And if we are just talking about childhood trauma and heartache, maybe we should alter the narrative. That's all I would suggest. So that was just my quick thought for you. It's not really a statement of anything. It's just like let's all stay open, stay reasonable, stay rational, and realize that there may be better narratives for us to be living by, because whatever narrative you end up with, it actually molds your reality in very, very strong ways. The story you're living by means that you will delete, distort, and generalize incoming information, incoming data, so that it fits the story you already have. We're not particularly rational beings. We're not rational beings at all. We can attempt towards rationality. We can pretend towards rationality, but it's always going to be, we must admit with humility, a somewhat failed attempt. We just do our best. So that would be critical thinking. You're reviewing your own thinking, going, hey, is this useful? Is this the right way to look at this scenario? Is there a more useful way to look at this scenario that would help me to fulfill my objectives and move forward in my life? If we're really just ever talking about childhood trauma and heartache, then perhaps this is the language we should be using. I've noticed, this is my final point, and then I'll go to questions. There is a very deep reluctance when I'm talking to people, either when I'm interacting here or on through Instagram, or recently I did some group coaching, and I say to people, are you heartbroken? And they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, well, you've said that you've come out of a narcissistically abusive relationship with somebody that you loved and couldn't be with because you said they have a clinical diagnosis. They have a clinically diagnosable personality disorder. but you're appalled at the idea you would be heartbroken. Why? Is this armoring? Are you in some sort of denial defense mechanism? Or do you not understand the situation that you're really in? Do you not want to admit that you're heartbroken when you are? If you're not heartbroken, I'd love to know. If you're genuinely not heartbroken, I'd be saying, well, what's the problem? Like, if you split up with somebody and you're not heartbroken that you split up with them, did you even want to be with them in the first place? If you didn't really want to be with them, like if you're not being blocked from being with a person by virtue of the clinically diagnosable personality disorder, why are you worried whether they have narcissism or not? What fucking difference does it? It doesn't make any difference. Just get on with your life. If you're not that bothered, just get on with your life. Elephant in the room, I do think for some people this is a hobby. Not for most, definitely not for all, but for many people, this is kind of a thing. It's what they do. And that's really not helpful. So we've got to be careful. Now I'll take questions. If you can make them one sentence long and end in a question mark, you would be helping Richard's brain. If you could write them in English with a degree of clarity. My English is pretty good. I can understand people, but sometimes I get like questions that come through like mumble rap. Michelle, you're, we all assume, highly intelligent. What have you noticed over the years about any correlations between intelligence, trauma, the self-actualization process, CPTSD, recovery, etc.? I hope I'm intelligent. I think that people who have a higher IQ tend to overthink these things. I think there's a tendency towards making more of it than there really is. People who have intelligence have a heightened ability to intellectualize. And one of the things that concerns me is that there is like, why do people obsessively watch channels that offer no solutions whatsoever? They just redefine and redefine and redefine and redefine the problem, or extend it out and build new names and new words and new jargon. I'm like, well, that is intellectualization in action. You're getting a dopamine hit by intellectualizing an emotional problem. So on the, let's say, the victim side, the target side, a higher IQ will lead to probably a greater risk of intellectualization, making more of it than there really is. On the other side of the equation, you know, if somebody is very intelligent and they're a manipulator, then they're going to be very, very good at doing the thing, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, the emotional abuse. But the correlation between intelligence and recovery is nil. The correlation between for the trait that you want for recovery would be more like resilience, would be more like courage, would be more like self-discipline, would be more like the willingness to consistently act in your own self-interest over time. And I don't know what that trait is called. Intelligence is a super important trait. It's an extremely important trait. And it gives a great indicator of the way people's lives play out, more than any of us would be comfortable with, because it's luck of the draw, really. You're either born with it or you're not. You can train people to be somewhat smarter and to think more clearly, but if you don't have the raw equipment, there's not much anybody can do for you. So there's a fatalism to it, which is not popular and is never going to be popular. So it's an interesting question, Michelle. Thank you for asking it. Fabiola asks, for people with childhood trauma, is it more of an issue learning how to grow up and becoming an adult? Yes, because for people without childhood trauma who were also raised by good enough parents, growing up and becoming an adult isn't an issue at all. They just grow up and become adults in a somewhat smooth way. You know, there'll be some turbulence, there'll be some bumps as they go, but they'll basically be okay. They'll basically go okay. So yes, there's definitely a correlation. Childhood trauma retards your growth. It shocks the system. You know, I speak to people sometimes raised in very frightening, abusive environments where perhaps one or both of the parents would engage with a small child with an adult level of psychotic rage. And the flood of adrenaline and cortisol puts like a sheet of iron in the consciousness flow of the child. And then the person grows up into an adult who can't concentrate. They're constantly dissociating. They're constantly drifting off into a fantasy land. Well, dissociation and drifting off into a fantasy land is going to make it bloody hard to grow up and be an adult, because adults aren't supposed to live in a world of make-believe. They're supposed to be able to interact with reality with a degree of sovereignty, a degree of intention and agency. So yes, it makes it inordinately hard, very, very hard. Good question. Thank you for asking. How do you feel about adult children of alcoholic meetings and inner child work? I don't really have any feelings about that. I think like if people want to heal and they set out with a good, clear intent to get that healing done, then they certainly can. Quantum Jesus, good name. How can you tell the difference when you're in a healthy state versus using avoidant techniques such as humor or playing video games? Quantum Jesus, you didn't ask for psychoanalysis. You just asked a question. It would be terribly rude of me to infringe upon your boundaries by psychoanalyzing you at this point, nor am I qualified to. So let me say this. This question is really only ever asked by people who have really, really low levels of emotional literacy. Like, you don't even know your own feelings. You're probably having quite strong flashbacks. You probably don't really understand your own emotions. Healthy feeling and avoidance techniques does not feel the same in any way that's confusing. The difference is night and day. So you'll know when you're engaging in like a neurotic, non-healthy coping mechanism versus an authentic emotional response. It's instant, but you must reduce your emotional flashbacks. You must increase your emotional literacy. You must deal with the superego. You must do these things, ladies and gentlemen. There's no way out but through. And I've taught you how to do all of these things on the Fortress Mental Health Protection System YouTube channel for free. You can get all that information for free. Once you've done the work, you'll never have any doubts about whether you're experiencing an authentic emotion or a neurotic coping mechanism ever again. Nez Mirage, is heartbroken the same as being addicted to the attention? And please, folks, don't use this term narc. Use the term NPD. If you have to shorten narcissist or narcissistic personality disorder, NPD is shorter than narc. Narc does not mean anything. And if you're lazy, NPD is shorter. So is it the same as being addicted to the attention and NPD gives you? No. Heartbroken is just a state where you were in love with somebody and you were betrayed in the most vulnerable parts of your being. You loved authentically, you loved with sincerity, and probably your love was exploited, was leveraged, was manipulated and used. It's another term for hurt. So one of the questions I've had running in my mind today, in the last couple of days, is instead of using these technical jargonistic terms that allow people and encourage people to intellectualize, maybe we should use terms that a 12-year-old could understand. So that would mean scrapping anything that has an acronym to it and then just saying something like hurt. This person is hurt. You're hurt. With NPD contact, you will be addicted to their attention. You'll be addicted probably or conditioned to, you probably more conditioned than addicted to the abuse. So when you're with somebody who is spiking up and down in their adrenaline regularly because they're emotionally dysregulated, you get into parallel with them and you get into congruence with them. So you're it's like secondary trauma or tertiary trauma. You actually start to develop the PTSD that they have. And over time, when you're with them and you get used to your adrenaline and whatever going up and down and becoming hypervigilant or very agitated, when that's not there, you might experience that as numbness or a feeling of emptiness. This typically comes about because just like the NPD, the codependent partner of the NPD also has a false self. The NPD's false self is predatory. It is there as a terrifying idol, a god or goddess-like idol to inspire terror and respect and lust and admiration and fawning and supplication in its targets. The codependent's false self is not an idol on a pedestal up high. It would be a little straw animal hidden away in a corner, because the purpose of the codependence false self is to say, don't attack my authentic self. Here's a false self you can attack, and you can destroy it, and I can reconstruct it afterwards, and it keeps me safe. So it's a decoy. With the narcissist, their false self is a kind of, in biological terms, is a false signaling. They're signaling power, they're signaling authority, they're signaling charisma and status, but it's false. It's completely false. It's there to generate narcissistic supply. The codependence false self is to say, listen, I'm not bothered, I'm not worth, there's no meat on these bones, don't eat me, go and choose somebody else, and to distract and dissuade. Thank you for your question, Nez Mirage, I enjoyed it. RJ Militant asks, is emotional literacy exercises another way to connect to the inner child? No, it's not. I mean, these exercises are described very well and with great clarity here on this channel and on the Fortress Mental Health Protection System channel. It is not anything other than what I have said it is. It's very, very simple. They're very, very simple. The emotional literacy exercises are just there to help a person who's become emotionally illiterate or numb to tune into their feelings and to tune into how they really feel, because it's not safe to be walking around with a head and a heart that isn't communicating. So you could say, I hate using the term shadow work, mainly because it's trendy and nitwits use it without understanding it. But strictly speaking, to the extent that Jung's concept of the shadow is everything that we have disavowed and shoved away into the unconscious, emotional literacy is shadow work. You're bringing that which is unconscious and in the darkness into consciousness and into the light. That's all it is. It's very, very simple and very powerful. I will catch up with your questions. If you can make your questions one sentence long, folks, and end in a question mark, that would be super helpful for me. What's up with anyone who consciously chooses to never grow up? I don't know. It might be a case that they're frightened of the responsibility that would come with that. Whenever people do things in life, you should assume that they're doing them purposefully. I learned this recently by reading Adler. One of his beautiful, great penetrating questions was, what is the purpose of this behavior? So whatever anybody is doing, you ask the question, what is the purpose of this behavior? What is the purpose of this behavior? Even in yourself, you do something, it seems to be self-destructive, it seems to make no sense. You just ask yourself, what is the purpose of this behavior? And you'll get somewhere. Martin Craig asks, does an apparent hurt in a child need to be integrated or let go of? You'll not hear me use the term inner child too much, Martin. It's not really my bag. It's not that I don't believe that there's an inner child or that it's a useless concept. It's not a useless concept. It's not a primary concept for me. To me, it's kind of like a way of saying, oh, my feelings aren't really my feelings. They're the feelings of another part of me. And I'm like, no, your feelings are your feelings. Even the ones that are childlike, even the ones that are fragile and vulnerable, that don't match your ego identity, they're still yours. Where there's pain in the past, it needs to be resolved in order for the person to move forward. That I can say with certainty. So. Look at this, 801 like me says, you totally skipped both my questions with capital letters. It happens to me every time I try to participate in these things. Well, you can see 801 like me that there's multiple questions coming through and I'm here on my own. So I have to scan through and try and find the ones that are there. It's not personal. I don't know you, so I'm not deliberately avoiding your question. UG Rose is quoting me. I like anybody who quotes me. I think it shows a depth of character, moral fiber, extremely high IQ, and excellent taste. Walking around brokenhearted with a mind which is not working cannot do in its place. What? Which a mind which is not working cannot do in its place? I don't know if I said that. That sounds crazy. Walking around brokenhearted with a mind which is not working cannot do in its place. Yeah, that's deeply mad. I might be reading that in the wrong inflection. I don't know who RG is, but that sounds like. Okay. Thank you, Yujiro. I appreciate that. Leo Jetson says, how come you've become so wise? I'm not. Anybody can pretend to be anything on social media. You can just model people who you think are wise, and you can copy their tone of voice. You can adopt some of their mannerisms or whatever you want, and you can also pretend to be like this, you know, and then who's going to fucking know? You can be a complete idiot in your own life. Look at Alan Watts. Everybody loves him. And like, the guy was a drunk and a womanizer with multiple baby mamas. I only looked this up because Alan Watts is he says good stuff, no doubt. I've enjoyed Alan Watts and I've learned from Alan Watts, but as an English person, his accent always sounded false. And I was like, what's this guy doing? You know, when he speaks, and it rather sounds like a chap who's trying to do an accent that has been trained by the BBC, and nobody fucking talks like that. And then I found out, like, he went to America, so he's doing this character of like a wise English Zen master talking to Americans. So he's doing a super BBC received pronunciation accent, and then I was like, it sounds fraudulent to me. And then I looked up all these other things. I was like, God, the guy was a drunk. I think he died of health issues related to the fact that he was an alcoholic. Not that he didn't have great things to say, but anybody can pretend anything. I could be a crackhead. You wouldn't know. Does marriage go against our primal instincts? I don't know. Like, marriage is multiple things in multiple contexts, different things in different cultures. It doesn't go against the primal instinct to safely pair bond. It doesn't go against the primal instinct for safe attachment. But if you're asking whether it goes against other primal instincts, like the desire to shed your DNA into as many humans as possible and to receive multiple DNA from as many humans as possible, maybe. But the fantasy that like where we've always been congruent and we've never had conflict, it needs to end. And there's multiple things that we do that are not quote unquote natural or primal. You know, genocide is natural, rape is natural, smashing somebody's head in with a rock is natural. It doesn't mean we do it. So I don't know. It's not my bag, but I wouldn't go down the road of saying being so strong as to say it's actually against primal instincts. It isn't. It isn't actually. You could. I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but I'm sure you could construct a fairly strong argument if you chose to that actually it's in line with primal instincts. But that's not the question. I think all of that is a distraction. You should be asking what you want. What do you want? And do you want to get married? Is that your thing? Is that your fancy? Why do you want to get married? You know, get real granular, really specific. Whenever people are looking at things that they want, you can never be too granular about it. So what is marriage to you? What does it really mean? What is it going to mean the first year that you're married? What's it going to mean the 5th year that you're married? What about the 50th year that you're married? What's that going to look like? Are you going to feel about it the same way? Is that going to be exactly what you want? Are there other options? Are there other ways of getting it done? Do whatever you want. Like, I'm not, whatever. It's like, but do it consciously. Do it with conscious awareness. K-Lys Bliss says, being oversensitive versus being emotionally abused, ? This isn't really a question. So I don't really know how to answer this. I'm not being facetious. I don't know what you mean because there's not enough here. So I don't know if you're implying that you're oversensitive, people are oversensitive. I don't know. Many people are authentically emotionally abused. Some people will role play that they've been emotionally abused because it suits a certain agenda. But as I said before, Adler asked a beautiful question about this, which is, what is the purpose of the behavior? You've got to keep asking, what's the purpose of the behavior? Richard, NPjazzsaxmusic says, Richard, any advice on protecting your mental health when working with BPD clients? You need really black belt levels of emotional literacy. You must have resolved your own childhood trauma. You must have resolved your own issues with your own parents, your own issues around love, because BPD clients will provoke every single sore spot, emotional insecurity or trauma that you have. And so all of that needs to be resolved first. And then you need to be very boundaried, and you need to be in regular therapy yourself. What's this? But Burgett says, if you're able to really love somebody, you don't live only with your primal instincts. Yeah, that's I was talking about that today. So there are rules, and they're biological facts, but love and attachment trumps a lot of these rules and facts. It changes things. And so, you know, you say, oh, in this situation, the status will always be like this and the power dynamic. You go, yeah, that's cool. But you'll always find examples where that's not the case. So to put it crudely, love in a certain sense functions like a binding agent between people, and it overcomes a lot of stuff that shouldn't work. If there's love there, it will overcome that. So this is a tricky one. We probably should be talking more about love because it's become such a corrupted issue. Courtney Ann Coleman says, you're so patient with people. How do you recharge so you don't get cranky? I'm cranky with people all the time. I just don't do it on YouTube. I still leave it on Instagram. I tell clients, not clients, but I tell people who ask me stupid questions, I'm going to send them to the gulag. I think a perspective is important. Like, a lot of people are very confused. Obviously, some people just want to be heard. They just want to ask a question and have me answer it because, I don't know, they get like a dopamine hit off it, which is fine. A lot of people are really, really confused. And, you know, I try to remember this is a great job. I used to clean toilets for a living with a long stick in Greece, for real. They didn't set up the sewage system there very well. That's the Brits' fault in the 1950s. So I've cleaned toilets, I've cleaned bars, I've thrown people out of nightclubs and punched them in the face for £9 an hour. And this is better than all of that by a long way. So if I do get cranky, I'm like, don't be such an entitled fuckface, or we'll put you back on the door again for £9 an hour. Ibrahim says, how do we overcome all these issues? There's a magic incantation. It's hard to say. I'm not a pheasant plucker. I'm a pheasant plucker's son. I'm only plucking pheasants till the pheasant plucker comes. And you have to repeat it 5 times rapidly with your pants around your ankles. And then all the issues go away. I think I'm going to answer 2 more questions and then it's probably time for me to go. I wish I knew, sir, how to resolve all the issues. I'd put in a bottle and I'd sell it to you out of kindness for a mere $5 million, because that's how kind I am. Our MPC says, how to get NPD girlfriend out of my house without letting her tears stopping me. Well, unless her tears turn into giant stone demons that stop her from leaving, the problem isn't really outside of you, is it? The problem is within you. So this is an issue of guilt. You feel guilty and you feel responsible for her. So to an extent, I would argue now, in my 7th year of doing this work since 2013, that this is not actually a psychological problem as much as it is a philosophical problem. So were we to work together, I would say to you, at a philosophical level, are you responsible for how other people feel? And where is the limit of your responsibility? And where is the limit of the people? Like, why choose her, our NPC? Can you send me your personal phone number via email afterwards? So every time I feel bad, you can do something about it. And in fact, if we could all have your number, could you take on like 15? Like, why stop with her? That's so unfair, you capitalist. This is socialism. We all want help. Obviously, you wouldn't do that. So why are you choosing to give her the special treatment? Why is she getting the special treatment? Why do you only feel sorry for her? Is she the only person who've suffered? So this kind of, if you were present with me, this kind of provocative dialectic would be there to show you that there's huge gaps in the map. Like, you've put her in some special status position where you're responsible for another adult human being's feelings. You're responsible for the fact she can't get her life together. You know she's NPD. You know this is a game, therefore. And I no hypocrisy. I've lived the same thing twice, where the person I was with convinced me that they were useless. They couldn't live without me. If I left them, terrible things would happen. Their lives would become meaningless. And then, inside of like 6 weeks, they'd be hooked up with somebody else, no problem. I'm like, hey, I thought you were going to be homeless and useless and just rolling around in your own weight, and you seem to be fine. So they play games, man. You're having your emotions tickled. Don't let her do that. But that's your internal boundaries that you have to work on. You're trying to rescue this human, and she's in the Cartman triangle. You're being the rescuer, and she's flickering between victim and abuser. And it's a game. You're not being sincere. She's not being sincere. You're both playing a game, and only through giving up the roles and giving up the game will you be able to get out of this. You have to let her cry, and cry outside, cry in the taxi that's come that I just called for you. Sounds harsh, but it's your only way out. Final question. Here we go. Hang on a second. There's a statement here from David Stevens to UG Rose. They're talking to each other here. This is not my conversation, but I have no boundaries. I couldn't help but hear you talking, David. Hi, how are you? I get really frustrated when I dance. I get para that people are watching and laughing. This is terrible. I don't want people too paranoid when they're dancing. Maybe I should do a course on that, how to not be paranoid when you're dancing around. David, I hope you overcome this issue. It's serious. The final question for the day is from Magdalena 665. Why are we hypernormalizing emotionless sex, and how to survive in this world of that kind of dating? I don't think long-term there is a long-term. I don't think long-term survival is an option. If we're going to keep playing this game, we have to change the game. You can't. My hypothesis, it's just a hypothesis. I'm not saying this is how it works. I'm just a guy who thinks about stuff. I think what has happened in multiple areas of life, but really I see it very strongly in dating today, in 2020, not dating fucking 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, is you have a number of people in the environment who are narcissistic psychopaths, not just narcissists, not just psychopaths, but full-blown narcissistic psychopaths. So say if you have like a group of 500 boys, 500 girls, sorry to be heteronormative, let's keep it simple. It works exactly the same way in the gay community. It's exactly the same thing. So we have 500 girls and 500 boys. And out of those 500, there's really only going to be 5 true narcissistic psychopaths, perhaps even less. But of those 5 in that 500, they will become the most significant, highest status, most high leverage people in that environment. The other 495 monkeys in that group, I'm saying boys and girls so that we have a goal-oriented game in place. It's dating. You mentioned dating. So they're trying to mate, they're trying to bond, they're trying to date, mate, and bond. So the other 495 who are not narcissistic psychopaths say, hey, I see what those fuckers are doing, and it's working. So I'm not a dating guy. I'm not a dating coach. I don't claim to understand all that stuff. But when I'm talking to people who are in that field, I always ask, what's the objective? So I've heard a lot of guys saying to me, I do this method, and it's working. And then I say, what's the objective? And they look at me like I've grown a second head. And I'm like, hang on a sec, you said it's working. It can only, the verb working means there's an objective, means you're moving towards something. What are you moving towards? Are you moving towards love? Are you moving towards the most number of partners you can get? Are you moving to, like, what's the game? What when you say working? So you have a situation where people see the narcissistic psychopath strategies and behaviors working. What is working? And all of you have to answer this for yourself. This is why when people would ask me about dating, I'd be really facetious about it and say, I'd answer them and be like, I don't do it. or I don't think it exists, or I think this is stupid Western decadence. I don't believe in it, which I really don't. I think it's a vague, hold-all concept that really needs defining, not for a collective, but for you. You as an individual, if you're dating, you need to know what the hell is up. Like, what are you trying to get done? What is the objective? So you asked the question, why is it hypernormalized to have emotionless sex? Because we're now living in a culture where everybody thinks the only way to live is to act like a narcissistic psychopath. I now have changed my tune on this one. I used to be very defiant and say there's no chance that there's a genetic component to this. I now think that there's a genetic and it's an epigenetic phenomenon. And I'll say this, if your natural inclination isn't narcissistic psychopathy, you don't have that in you, but you try to live like that, as actually the majority of people do. The majority of people are trying to live like narcissistic psychopaths. You will go crazy. You'll go completely batshit crazy because the coordinates of a narcissistic psychopath are alien to humans. They're alien. So it would be like aliens coming down with a completely different body, a completely different brain, a completely different way of doing things, and us going, oh, let's live exactly like they live. Well, would you even expect to survive? I wouldn't expect to survive. I would expect to eventually die. So I think there's a kind of psychological and spiritual death going on. So this is why what you end up with, like to say, after the apocalypse, after we've normalized, hyper-normalized, emotionless sex and narcissistic psychopathic mating strategies, we now live in a post-apocalyptic world where there's no love. You can't talk love to people. They get all weird and fucking squirmy. I'm like, well, then why live? What are we fucking living for? It's the only thing that makes this nonsense worth doing. And we're all like, it's weird. I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to be open. I don't want to be authentic. So you have a bunch of armored people running around trying to live the coordinates of narcissistic psychopaths, which they're not qualified for, by the way. Nobody, please, don't get the idea in your head that the right way to live is like that. You will slowly die psychologically and spiritually. You'll die emotionally. It will kill you. It's poison. The only people, there's not a should, but the only people who can live like that are narcissistic psychopaths. And when you try to do it, you will hurt yourself. You'll end up very traumatized by it. Very traumatized by it. Because it's a very sick way to live. But this is the culture. It's like, oh, narcissistic psychopaths, they're the fucking best thing. Why don't I do that? All right, let me know how you get on living like that. So we now have, as a consequence of that, an extremely love deficit environment. These are the things behind the scenes that I think are creating the explosion in people claiming that they're the victims of narcissistic abuse. And probably what they are is the victims of emotional abuse due to a highly narcissistic attachment style that is the product of very aggressive consumer capitalism, very, very aggressive, hyper materialistic consumer capitalism that tells you consume as much as you can, pleasure yourself as much as you can. There are no people, there are only products. Have as many orgasms as you can, have as much pleasure as you can, and then die, because there's nothing else. We're in a post-ideological age. There's nothing else. There's just capitalism and materialism. Eat, fuck, die. And that's it. That's your life. And people go, I don't feel good. I feel sick. And I'm like, yeah, fucking wonder why. You're fucking eating poison every day. You're consuming a poisonous ideology at its purest. And then you're sick. You're sick. So why does it thrive? Why do narcissistic attachment styles thrive in this environment? Because we only understand exploitation and consumption now. So why would you not exploit and consume another human being as though they were a product? So that creates the narcissism. You go, oh, I'm experiencing this as narcissism. Actually, it's a consumer trying to consume you, but okay, still, it is narcissism with a little n. And then people stay in those relationships. Why? There's no fucking options. You find a little island of abuse that's tinged with something that looks like love, you will choose that over the empty desert where there's no love at all. And so it's very hard to get out of these relationships in this current cultural climate that we're living in now. It's a love deficited environment. Love is scarce. Authenticity is scarce. Time and attention from other human beings is scarce. So you want to be on your own, or you want to get time and attention from somebody who's torturing you? You know, it's kind of a difficult choice. Sorry, that's a bit bleak. I'm very hopeful, though, that this one issue can be resolved. This is an issue that can be resolved, and I think it will. I think the tide is turning. People are utterly sick of this. They know it doesn't work. They know that it can't work. And so the next, we may even be looking at a revolution of consciousness that's around love, that's around sexuality, and around people coming back to each other. It seems more and more likely every day. I'm very optimistic about that. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that was useful. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you all very soon. Cheers.